No worries, Jens and everyone at Empty Cloud. uh, okay, everyone. So I was thinking of a topic, and then I think I'll just continue with some more self-disclosure. Some Dhamma from my own experience and what I've been doing in my monk's life. So before my Dhamma talk, salutation to the Buddha. Namo tase bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhase. Namo tase bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhase. Namo tase bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhase. So, one of the reasons that I became a Buddhist, and one of the reasons which I became a Bhikkhu, or took the papaja, renounced the world, was because of a very important monk in my life. His name was Bhante Puniji Mahatera. So I had been coming to this temple, Sarath Chandra Buddhist Center in North Hollywood, for maybe only 2 or 3 months. And one day when I came for meditation, they told me there was not going to be any meditation, but there was going to be a Dhamma talk. I didn't know what a Dhamma talk was. And there was going to be this very senior monk, very interesting monk who could really connect with Westerners. So I decided to stay. To be honest, that Dhamma talk went like over my head. A lot of things were fascinating, but it was just too much for me at that time. And they said, next week, he's going to be giving another talk. You should come. And I was like, okay, whatever, because I had already planned that every Friday I would come to meditation. I didn't want to break that pattern. So I still came. But the second time, something clicked. There was something that he said that clicked because one of our meditators here, named Selinda, she asked a question. And Bhante gave a very direct answer. And when he said that, it just clicked for me. And I said, yeah, I want to practice the Dhamma now, like seriously. So from that day forward, I started, reading Bhante Puniji's books and listening to all his Dhamma talks online. And Bhante Puniji was really interested in, creating a bridge between, traditional Buddhism, whatever that means, or at least the way he knew it in Sri Lanka, and the West, right? Using Western concepts in order to facilitate understanding Buddhist concepts, right? So Bhante Puniji focused a lot on psychology. He thought that, Westerners put a lot of trust in science, right? Or when their own ideas, philosophy, and he was going to use, their own system as a bridge, to connect them with the suttas and the teachings of the Buddha and how it's practiced in Sri Lanka. So he decided on psychology and focusing really on not the theoretical part so much, although he did some of that, more on the practical part. So he really focused on, psychotherapy, Western psychotherapy as a bridge to understanding the Dhamma. And I think he was very successful in that. So because of him, I started reading a lot of books on the intersection between, Buddhist psychology and Western psychology, focusing mostly on psychotherapies. And so I read many books. One of the most influential books was an introduction to Buddhist psychology by Padmasiri de Silva, who was the head of the, I think, Buddhist or philosophy department in Peradeniya University in Sri Lanka. And he was also a therapist on top of being a professor of philosophy. So I really came from like this kind of early Buddhist sutta-based psychological perspective. I really took it on. And I also read many Western books like Mark Epstein's Thought Without a Thinker, Altered Traits by Ritchie and Goldman. And so I read all the books that were available to me, all the pop Buddhist psychology books, I guess we would call them, and scholarly ones, but from people like Padmasiri de Silva, people who grew up within the Buddhist context from a Buddhist family and studied in the traditional context, their view of what Buddhist psychology would mean in the West or in modernity. But then on the day of my higher ordination in Sri Lanka, I talked to my teacher, Bhante Puniji, because he was always traveling, and most of the time he stayed in Mahavihara in Malaysia, where Bhante K.C. Dhammananda used to be the abbot there, very famous monk. So he kind of filled in for him by request of the people there. And he went to many other places. He was also in Taiwan at Fo Guang Sha for many years as a professor of Buddhism. And so when I talked to him that day of my ordination, I was the last one because I had the less time as a Samanera. Those other people had like 8-10 years all Samanera. So my ordination wasn't until midnight. So during that time of the day, I talked to him for like an hour, and he told me, his vision and how he wanted to continue it and what I can do to help him. But then 3 days after my ordination, he passed away on the full moon night of July. Yeah. In almost 4 years ago. And so then I really felt that it was my duty. I took it upon myself to try to contribute to his work and his mission of what he wanted to do. So I decided to enroll in a master's degree program of counseling psychology. And so I've been doing that now for over 2 years. And during that time, at every time at the end of almost every class, we have what we call a case study or a vignette, and you have to, diagnose the pseudo client and create a treatment plan and do a lit review on why you use this certain sort of psychological intervention, why it's justified. Does it work within the population? What are the benefits, what are the limitations of it? So I always try to do my homework, my final papers on from this perspective. So I would choose, like some sort of contemplative psychotherapy, mostly looking at mindfulness, using mindfulness to kind of like treat, these pseudo clients. So in this process, I was able to do a significant literature review of focusing specifically on mindfulness-based interventions, aka also known as mindfulness-based therapies. Specifically within the domain of mood disorders like anxiety and depression. So every semester, like for 2 or 3 classes, I would throw that in there, right? That was my stick. Also, at the same time, I decided to get certifications in some mindfulness-based interventions, like mindfulness-based substance abuse treatment for adolescents. And also a 12-step program called Mindfulness in Recovery. So I got those 2 certifications as a mindfulness-based facilitator. And this year I was able to be part of a mindfulness research study at my university, where there was a 1-unit course specifically designed for future clinicians, future therapists, in which the whole weekend they would spend learning about mindfulness, doing mindfulness activities. And And it was a qualitative study, which means like, just like loosely based, like formatted questions, like interview style. There was like no real quantitative measures, only qualitative. And there was a good response to it. And then about, I think, a month and a half ago, we presented this study. Well, I'm forgetting the name of the conference right now, but we presented it, and it went really well. It was received very well, and so now we're planning to do a whole semester, a 3-unit class, which is going to be dedicated to teaching mindfulness, but this time for undergrads now. So it's going to be like an undergrad class. Imagine like mindfulness 101 or something like that, right? It's not fully developed yet. So yeah. So what did I learn like doing like this study? I feel, when I was reading all of this and when I was surrounded by people who were interested in mindfulness, I felt like there was like I felt like everyone had drank the Kool-Aid. Like all I heard was good stuff about mindfulness, and everyone was so enthusiastic about it. And you see all these things like in Psychology Today, and like, when you go onto Google and you get your news, like mindfulness for everything. Mindfulness is the opiate of the masses now. It's a panacea for all your problems. And it was in so many different articles, mindfulness was defined like completely differently. I remember reading this report from the National Health Institute, and they said that one of the reasons that there's many limitations on mindfulness research is because people can't agree on what mindfulness is. So are they all talking about the same thing? Like, are they talking about different things? What's going on here? Yeah, everyone's using different interventions, different ways of applying mindfulness, and defining it differently. So that was one of the limitations they stated in that government report. And then when I went through like meta-analysis, I saw that there is some benefits. Like people who are treated with mindfulness-based interventions and therapies, especially for mood disorders. There was this one meta-analysis done, I think it was in 2015. Was it 2015? No, I can't remember the year right now. But if you need the information, I can send it to you and put it in the comments or in the details of the video. So there was this meta-analysis done focusing on depression and anxiety. And they did find that people who participated in mindfulness-based interventions, such as mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and other mindfulness-based therapies, they did see a reduction of the symptoms that are associated with depression and anxiety. But again, they said the limitations were that mindfulness means different to different people, and there isn't one real way to measure it, and people are using different measurements. There isn't only one way to measure mindfulness, and most importantly, that it doesn't. There's not enough evidence right now to show that it outshines other therapies, right? It doesn't outshine treatment as usual. So treatment as usual, usually, especially for like depression, would be um, uh, psychotropic medication, like antidepressants, and CBT, cognitive-based therapy. Those would be the normal things that would be used for a person with a depressive disorder or major depressive disorder. And then for anxiety too, they usually don't really use like medication for anxiety that much. It's mostly based on psychotherapy, and also CBT is like the main one. So it just kind of matched up in there, like mindfulness-based interventions and treatment as usual. They were kind of like tied, right? It doesn't show that mindfulness outshines them. It doesn't do better than them, except within this one limited context that I think Kyokin in 2015 was the first one. One of the first ones to publish this, that within the context of avoiding relapse in depression, mindfulness based cognitive therapy showed to be more effective in reducing relapse in people experiencing depression over like medication, antidepressants, right? So there it was very unique, but it's very niche right there where we can actually see mindfulness outshining other things. Um, but then I saw another study, which is very interesting, where there was this scientist who was wondering, is it mindfulness itself or is it like the whole program? Because these mindfulness based interventions, they're like group therapies, they're psychoeducation where they teach them about like stress or whatever their problem is, anxiety, depression. And there's like that group setting where it's a support system. And there's also, cognitive tools that are being used, behavioral tools that are being used. Um, so there's all these other things that can contribute to the results. So then this person decided, hey, you know what? Let's set up an experiment. Let's have a control group. Let's have a mindfulness-based cognitive therapy group, and let's have a CBE group, which is basically mindfulness-based cognitive therapy without the mindfulness in it. And let's see what happens, right? For depression. Um, and they ran the study and they saw, yeah, obviously the control group didn't do so good. Didn't really get much benefit. But both the mindfulness-based therapy and the non-mindfulness based one scored the same. There was no difference. So then here we can infer that, um, you know, you get the same benefits whether mindfulness is there or not. So that was very interesting, right? So it kind of indicates that it's not mindfulness that's doing the work for the people with depression. It's maybe the group setting, the way it's formatted, the psychoeducation, or the cognitive tools, the behavioral tools that are being used. So that kind of that's kind of shuts down a little bit of this whole hype about mindfulness. Um, but I did find other studies where they just separate mindfulness by itself, and they do show that mindfulness, significantly increases attention and other kind of like cognitive functions. But that doesn't necessarily translate over into like helping you deal with anxiety or depression, right? Just because you're more aware or just because you're more attentive or you have, more clarity in your cognition doesn't necessarily translate to helping people relieve symptoms of a major depressive disorder or of an anxiety disorder, like social anxiety disorder. There really isn't any connection between these two. So then knowing all of this, when I started my research assistant position at the university, and everyone's like, yeah, mindfulness, let's go, which I'm I'm a Buddhist monk. I'm super excited, enthusiastic about mindfulness too. Um, you know, I had to put out the limitations and share with them what the research says. And, I could see a lot of people didn't expect that coming from a Buddhist monk. They thought I was going to be like, yeah, mindfulness is the best. And yeah. And I kind of received a little pushback from certain people, on this, because I wasn't going along with it. Although my professors were like, great, that's a great job, what you're doing. We need your information. And I think it's great. But, I think as, Buddhist people or meditators or people that are enthusiastic about mindfulness or whatever we want to call ourselves or whatever you consider yourself, we have to be very clear, that whatever we call mindfulness in Buddhism is not necessarily the same mindfulness that's being used out there for, these kind of studies. And when we do find, evidence, or we read some article or some news or something comes on the TV about, the benefits of mindfulness, we have to understand it within its context, and we have to understand the limitations of it. Because as a Buddhist monk, I see a lot of people suffering. And unfortunately, some of these people try to do what's called a spiritual bypass. So there's people experiencing severe disorders, mental disorders, and they think that, one way to overcome this health issue is to go to the temple. And if I go to the temple, I'll be free from my mental disorder. It may happen, but temples are not the site. They're not clinics. That's not what it's meant for. I'm not saying that they won't get any benefit. I think, there's evidence that shows that, you know, um, being part of a religious group, attending religious places does help people's well-being, and having a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning also helps people that are experiencing even physical illnesses like cancer and things like that. And I do think, as a Buddhist monk that practices meditation, I have seen the benefits of reduced symptoms of like depression and anxiety and other things like that. But that might not necessarily translate to the extreme cases of people who have actual disorders, right? It might be completely different. And as from one of the cases that I shared with you, one of the articles that when they compared these 3 different kinds of interventions, whether mindfulness was there or not, the people got the same amount of benefit from it. So we can see there that it wasn't really mindfulness that's doing the work. It's the structure of the program that's really helping. So I think that, as a monk, as someone who promotes meditation and at time supplements, the benefits of meditation with empirical studies, right? Evidence-based studies. We have to be very aware of the limitations of mindfulness and realize that what we're doing in the temple, it might not be the same thing that's happening out there, and this thing that's happening out there might not be, don't believe the hype is basically what I'm saying. Don't hype it up. Don't believe the hype. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. Everything has to be understood within its context, and I think that's very important. We shouldn't be so enthusiastic about meditation and Buddhism that we just pick anything that sounds good, that seems to support our point of view, right? and just throw it out there and be like, yeah, science says this about meditation, mindfulness, and you're using it all just because it makes you feel good, because it supports your view, right? It validates what you've dedicated your life to, your philosophy. I'm a Buddhist person. But we have to be careful because there's a lot of gaps in there. There's a lot of how they say it, like the devil's in the details, right? So we have to be very careful as we promote Buddhism and meditation and mindfulness and all these things. So I think I've talked long enough. If anyone has any specific questions, I know the comments were going up and down. So let me go with the comments first, and let me see if I can catch anything here. Scott Bardell, how do these systems of treatment align with Dhamma? That's like, I think, a very important question. You see, the Dhamma is not limited to an 8-week intervention. The Dhamma is not limited to 2-hour sessions once a week. The Dhamma is not limited only to mindfulness. I mean, mindfulness is only one